Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we are here to talk about all the things going on in the Big Ten. It's our basketball episode today, so we are going to continue to kind of preview, predict a little bit of basketball just to get you ready for the basketball season. We have Derek from the Victors Nation Big Banter Sports Michigan podcast, and then we have Dylan from the WildChat Northwestern podcast here to join us and talk through some of the Big Ten. I'm going to go ahead and let Derek introduce himself and tell him where you can find the podcast at.
So the Victors Nation, we are a community of diehard Michigan fans, and you can find us on Facebook. We have over 14,000 followers on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter or X, whatever you refer to it as. We've got a website up and running, www.thevictorsnation.com. We're trying to keep up-to-date Michigan sports content for all sports on the website. We've got a forum started up on the website as well. And to follow our podcast, we typically do 2 or 3 podcasts a week. As we get into basketball season, we'll probably cater more towards the 3. We'll wait and see how that ends up coming about. But if you go to YouTube, we've got a YouTube channel up where we're streaming all of our podcasts at the Victors Nation.
Sweet. All right. Thanks, Derek. And to make their debut, the WildChat podcast debut, is Dylan here with us. We've never had a WildChat member on with us. So, Dylan, go ahead and let people know where they can find you and where they can find the podcast at.
Yeah, happy to be the first member of the WildChat here. WildChat, me, my roommate, Adam, and one of our close friends, Ashley. We're all students at Northwestern. Love Northwestern sports. Love every bit. You can find us, I guess, right now. We have our YouTube at the WildChat, and we're also available on Spotify. And check out our Twitter at the WildChat. That's mainly where we're posting everything, where all of our new episodes are coming out. Relatively new podcast, so don't have a ton of things established just yet. But we're working on it, getting new and getting more up there.
For sure. And we'll do our best to try and get Adam and Ashley on, especially this basketball season, as much as we can, because I want to hear from them. I like to listen to the WildChat. I think there's good analysis there. And I also like to listen to Victors Nation as well. We had Dre on a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, and he did a really good job too. So if you're watching on YouTube, please do not forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts, please do go ahead and follow us there, and also give us a rating. It helps us out, and we would like to hear back from you on what you think of the podcast overall, and it does help us to improve. Okay, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get into it. We have some things to talk about today with basketball. We have Big Ten Media Days that happen. We're going to kind of give a little bit of an overview for Northwestern and Michigan, talk through those. And then we also have conference realignment talk in basketball. So it's not specific to basketball, but there were some coaches, asked some questions. We're going to get into that a little bit, share some thoughts, and go from there. But our first thing to do is to get into some expectations for 2024 for Michigan and for Northwestern. So, Derek, we're going to let you go first here. What are some fair expectations, maybe like a floor and ceiling type of deal for Michigan this season?
Yeah, so, I think that as we come into this basketball season, there's going to be quite the contrast from what we're talking about with Michigan right now, where when you talk Michigan football, we're talking national championship potential. But when we talk basketball, expectations are a lot lower than certainly what they've been the last few years. Because 2 years ago, that's what we were talking for basketball too, as an expectation was national championship caliber teams. So it's going to be interesting. Expectations are low, and a lot of people I don't really think know what to expect out of this team. So we lost 3 key starters off of last year's team, 2 to the draft, with Jet Howard and Kobe Buffkin being lottery picks in the draft, and then Hunter Dickinson transferring to Kansas. Right, that was a big part of our offense. Coming in, we've got a couple transfers coming in Olivier Kamawo, I think is how you pronounce his last name.
I was going to ask how to pronounce that one.
Yeah. Kamoa, I think is how you pronounce it. And Namari Burnett and Trey Jackson from Seton Hall. So it's hard to even know exactly what the starting lineup's going to look like. And to be honest, I think that there's going to be a lot of contributors on Michigan this year. So I think it's going to be a team that shows depth, but I think it's a team that shows depth because there's not the star power that they've had in the last couple of years. And that could be a blessing in disguise because a couple of times, if you watched Michigan the last couple of years, sometimes they would almost get stuck trying to do individual things rather than having a good offensive flow. And that's what happens when you have a big man as good as Hunter Dickinson. That's what happens when before last year we had Caleb Houston, another one and done NBA player. That's what happens when you get that type of star talent, is sometimes you try to call their name and hope that they can come through. Now, when that star talent with Jet Howard and Kobe Buffkin and before that Caleb Houston, when you're talking about 18-year-old kids and you're putting the ball in their hands in some of the biggest situations that they've ever been in, it's hard to fault maybe it not working out the way that you want it to. So I think what we're going to see is a deep roster, a lot less star talent than what we've seen. And that could be good because there could be better offensive flow, better defensive flow on the floor. So when you talk about what is the floor of the Michigan team this year, I think they're being projected at their floor. I think that right now, if you look at the projections for where Michigan's expected to finish in the conference, most people are putting us almost as a bottom feeder. So I think you're looking at, we're 10th or 11th in the conference by most people, typically finishing just ahead of Penn State, Minnesota, and Nebraska. I think that's the floor. I don't think that the talent that we have, even if it's not as much as it's been, and the talent that we have in our coaching staff, I don't think that Michigan basketball is going to fall below that floor. Now, what could the ceiling be? Last year, Michigan went 4-13 in games that were decided by 6 points or less. They had 16 total losses, but 13 of them were within 6 points. And that's crazy, but there are times where it was kind of head scratching. What are they rolling out there for the final 30 seconds or a minute of the game for lineups? That was somewhat head scratching. And I think that goes back to trying to call a specific player's number instead of trying to call a good play. And if we get a couple things to go our way, there's a lot of uncertainty in the conference. There's a lot of teams that lost their best players. There's a lot of teams that have transfer players coming into their roster. So there's a lot of unexpectedness that I think we're going to see, and things go really well. Say this team just hits it off and plays as a team. The transfers come together really well. I don't think it would be unreasonable to say that we could finish somewhere in the 6 through 8 range within the conference, which I think would put us on the bubble, on the right side of the bubble come March Madness. Whereas if we finish at the floor, where we finish kind of towards the bottom of the conference, I think that keeps us on the outside looking in again.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. That's or the note about the coaching and stuff like that, because for me, that's the kind of key to Michigan this year is, can Juwan Howard develop as a coach? Because he's obviously very good at bringing the talent in, right? He brought his son in, and like you said, they had who was the Kobe Buffkin last year with Jet, who got drafted, and Hunter Dickinson actually developed well under him as well. So, there is talent there, and but the in-game coaching is really where I feel like that's where Juwan Howard can improve. And if he does improve that way, watch out. He's going to be a dangerous coach in the conference.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of hard to say too, because you point out a good thing, right? So, Kobe Buffkin turned into a top 15 NBA draft pick out of nowhere. So Hunter Dickinson developed a 3-point shot to put him in the conversation of being an NBA draft pick. Because without that, he was a big man that had a couple moves down low and can dominate in college basketball. So he needed to develop an outside game. So like you said, I don't think it's player development necessarily. I think that he can recruit, and I think that he can develop. But like you said, it's some of the in-game coaching, and who knows, he called out the team a little bit last year where he said that he was asked in a press conference what happened with the final play. And he said, sometimes you call one thing and the players decide to do something else on the court. And so who knows if it was some young heads trying to get that last shot, or if it was play design.
That's true. That's true. All right, Dylan, you guys are coming off of one of your best seasons in program history. I was rooting for the Wildcats last year. Second round in the NCAA tournament. I mean, just a huge year for Northwestern. Chris Collins looks like the guy. 22-12 last year. What's your expectations for the season this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about all this, considering, I mean, this is arguably the highest Northwestern fans have ever felt about the basketball team heading into a season. You look at this time last year, people had Chris Collins on the hot seat. Now you're looking at him. I believe he just got an extension over the offseason as well.
Yeah, I think
You're
so.
thinking, can he bring Northwestern to back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances for the first time in program history? I think, yes, that's a very serious possibility.
Mhm.
You guys talked to Michigan, how expectations completely different from the football team. I mean, yeah, same here, except the complete opposite. Although the football team's not doing as bad as we thought. This team is one where last year it was a team built on defense. Every game felt like it was going to be a low-scoring game. Games were coming down to the wire, but Northwestern was able to survive and win a ton of them. You lose Chase Audige, who I believe was Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. He was incredible, just the way he was able to steal some of those balls, get plays going the other way. He's going to be a guy that is tough to replace. However, you have to hope that some of these guys that we did bring in can improve, because Audige was a little bit inconsistent offensively, and arguably the entire team was. However, they brought in a bunch of transfers that should be able to help. Justin Mullins, Ryan Langborg, who had a big impact during Princeton's run in the NCAA tournament, Blake Preston coming over from Liberty. All of those guys are going to make a big impact. I think Northwestern is still going to play a pretty defensive style of game. However, offensively, you still have Boo Buie getting some of the most hype I've seen overall. I mean, made the Big Ten first team, preseason first team. I think he's getting some All-American hype, and he deserves it. He is a phenomenal player, can make basically anything happen. I mean, he's clutch as well. I remember his game winner against Indiana with 2 seconds left, just all over the place. There is talent. You look at some of the other guys as well in Brooks Barnheiser, who in my opinion is going to make the biggest jump on the team, because I think he's going to get some more serious playing time this year. He was one of those guys who, when he had the ball in his hand, it looked like he could do something special with it. He's a guy that this year, without Audige in here, I assume he'll get a bigger role, make a big jump this year, and really take on. He's a guy that, if this team looks to be a little bit more offensive, Brooks Barnheiser is that type. And then also looking at the center position with Matt Nicholson. Nicholson was a guy who really, before last year, nobody knew who he was. And then all of a sudden, he just emerges. He was terrific defensively. That's kind of the theme with this team. And, offensively, it took a little bit of time for him to develop. But as the season went on, you look towards the NCAA tournament, he had his best game of the year in the last game. UCLA, I believe he put up 16 points, was terrific defensively. He's a guy that really excited about. And then you have Luke Hunger, who got hurt early on in the year, and that hurt our center depth. And that was a big issue with the team, was that after Matt Nicholson, you had basically Titus Verhoeven, who was okay, but not great. And then Nick Martinelli, who just very young, didn't know a ton, but I'm excited about him as well. But so center depth was an issue last year. I'm really excited about what's going to happen this year. And I think this team overall is going to just be a good team. I know they're getting hype around, seventh ranked team in the Big Ten. I think that's fair, but honestly, last year came into the year very underrated, 13th or 14th chosen, end up finishing second in the Big Ten. I could almost say that they are being underrated as well again this year. Obviously, the Big Ten is a terrific basketball conference, but I could see them finishing top 5 once again. I mean, you look at what happened last year. I believe we went into that final game of the year, and it was basically, if you win, you can finish as high as number 2. If you lose, you can finish as low as number 9 in the Big Ten. And I remember that was a big deal. We ended up winning that game against Rutgers, I think it was. So I think it could go anywhere ultimately. I really do see a situation where they do finish top 5, even top 3, arguably, in the Big Ten. I just think it's going to determine, hey, how can they play in some of these close games? How can they play defensively? Will they be able to make up for the loss of Chase Audige? Will Boo Buie still be that guy? I think the answers are going to be yes. It's the most excited I've ever been. I don't know if you guys have any clue what's happening with our fan base, but basically we had to implement a whole new ticketing system for students. I'm on the executive board of our student section, and we had to implement a whole new thing so students could get tickets, because we just don't have enough tickets because the hype is just so much for this basketball team. People are just itching to get into the Welsh Ryan Arena for some of these games. I'm so excited. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome analysis there. Brooks Barnheiser is one I'm super excited to see play. I've heard the hype for him, and I've heard kind of, the abilities he has and the tough mismatch he's going to be able to be. So he's one of those guys that I'm really interested to see play early on in the year and then see how he develops. But that's an interesting note. I didn't know that about your student section, and what's the size capacity of your arena? Do you know? Is it very big, kind of small?
No, it's roughly 8,000 is what it
Okay,
holds. Student wise attendance, we're only really allotted like 1,200 seats out of that 8,000 as well. And we're a school of 8,000, so we implemented
right,
this like point system that's been used at other schools where people have to go to some of the other sporting games to be able to
right.
build it up. I found out today I am number 2 overall in the school in most amount of
Nice.
points. So I
Is
will be
Adam number
attending all
one?
of our men's basketball games. No, he's not. He's a little bit lower down. We're both Ashley, Adam, and I are all on the executive board of our student
Okay.
section, so we'll all be fine. But yeah, it's
I'd like
interesting.
that if Adam was
But
number one. It could be like some roommate
little
rivalry.
roommate
Who can get the
rivalry. Yeah.
first spot? Yeah. It's like,
I
hey, you
will
want to go to the
say, I
game
will say
tonight?
with
No, you're not going.
I will say with Wells Shrine Arena, even though it is so small, the sound stays in there, and that's a big
Yeah.
aspect of I think a lot of our home court advantage. It felt like when we were at home last year, we were basically unstoppable. I know we lost to Michigan at home last year, and I believe Rutgers, but those are the only two that I can really remember. But even those games, it was just completely rocking. The crowd was getting into it. We had definitely a few chants that were not PG, not safe for work at all. I think I don't know if it was our school president or the athletic director had to come out after the Indiana game and basically say that we were just way too unruly because
Mm,
Miller Kopp, who transferred from Northwestern to Indiana,
yeah.
he got some choice words from us and the student section. But yeah, games are fun. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think that's an underrated aspect of going to the games now, especially as a student. If you have somebody who transferred in your conference and they're coming back to your arena, like you're not gonna be treated kindly. And maybe it goes too
Yeah,
far. I have no idea, but yeah, no, I asked that because it does kind of remind me of Duke's arena as well, because I think they're only like 11,000 or something like that. And
yeah,
dude, when
they're
that
small as
place
well.
is, yeah, when that place is really going, it's going. It's one of the best arenas out there, because of that size and how loud they can really make the environment. So very interesting, very interesting. All right, let's move on to our next subject here. We're going to get into the Big Ten preseason all conference teams and awards. So I have what the media wrote down here, and then I want you guys to kind of evaluate it, and we'll go from there. So our media first team is Zach Edey at center, Tyson Walker, the guard from Michigan State, Terrence Shannon Jr., guard from Illinois, Jameer Young, guard from Maryland, Boo Buie, guard from Northwestern, so very guard heavy this year. AJ Hogard, guard from Michigan State, is on the second team. Cliff Amorie on the second team. Center from Rutgers, Xavier Johnson, guard from Indiana. Chucky Hepburn, guard from Wisconsin. Olivier, last name Kahuma, that forward from Michigan. The listeners here know I'm terrible with names, so that one just really
Yeah.
gets me. And then the media Big Ten preseason player of the year obviously is Zach Edey. The media breakout player of the year, I was kind of surprised by this, Bruce Thornton from Ohio State. And then the media wild card is Indiana. The media sleeper team is Ohio State. So Dylan, let's start with you. What were kind of your overall thoughts with what the media chose here?
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure by that wild card pick in Indiana because I just
Yeah.
feel like Indiana's a team that I know they lost a lot of guys to the NBA, but they're one of those teams that still recruits really well. And they're a team that I
Mhm.
feel like is always just super good. So I didn't quite understand calling them a wild card. One of the teams that I think stands out to me, and I saw they were ranked number 5, which also feels a little bit low for them, but that's Wisconsin to me. And one of the rankings I saw, I think they're a team that one has a ton of experience, and I think experience is really big when it comes to college basketball. They're returning just tons of guys, maybe their entire starting 5. I can't remember exactly. I'm really big on Chucky Hepburn. When he played against Northwestern, he was a guy that was always kind of making something happen. I got to broadcast the Northwestern Wisconsin game for our student radio, and he was one of those guys that I was pointing out as like this kid is really good. So Wisconsin's one of those teams that I want to call a sleeper, but they're not necessarily a sleeper because they are getting some decent preseason hype, but maybe not enough preseason hype is more where I'm going with that. And as for the all conference teams, I mean, I think they were pretty good. I would almost maybe move Chucky Hepburn up to first team, and maybe hot take, move Terrence Shannon Jr. down to second team. But that's also not me hating on Illinois. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Dude, you're preaching exactly what I'm thinking over here. Wisconsin was kind of like that team. If I had to give like a top two or three, which we're going to talk about that. So, if I was going to give like a top two or three, Michigan State, Purdue, obviously, and then Wisconsin was the other one that I was going to give just because of that experience. And Chucky Hepburn, I think he's a dude. I think he can really make things happen. And so, man, I'm right there with. And I'll offend you, Illinois fans. I don't think Terrence Shannon Jr. is the guy. I just don't think so. I think that he's inconsistent. I think that he's erratic, and I just don't think that he has enough discipline under Brad Underwood and that coaching staff. So, Illinois fans, you can hate me all you want. I don't think he's the guy. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but that's just me. He's getting a lot of hype this year, and I don't know if it's deserved. Derek, save me here. Give the Illinois fans some hype or something to make them feel better. I don't know.
So I do feel like Illinois is going to be a tough team. So I think that I think we've got a top tier of three teams in Michigan State, Purdue, and Illinois this year that are going to be a little bit better than the rest. I agree on Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin does return all five of their starters from last year. So, and Wisconsin's been a historically good program. Wisconsin was another one of those teams like Michigan last year that they're in a lot of tight games, and a roll here, a roll there. Could have been in the NCAA tournament instead of playing in the NIT, but they made a run in the NIT. And historically, we see teams that do make runs in the NIT and return a lot of the production from that year typically come back and have a pretty good year. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Wisconsin go to Wisconsin basketball, where they play tough defense, they play tough offense, and it might not be sexy basketball, but it produces wins, and both teams score in the 50s, and they're completely fine with that.
Is it ever sexy basketball in the Big Ten?
There have been times.
Maybe Iowa.
Right. Iowa tries to. There's been times where Purdue, when Purdue is hitting, when they're hitting their shots and not just relying on Zach Edey, where they can drop a lot of points. So
I will tell you that Northwestern Wisconsin game last year was maybe one of the ugliest basketball games I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, Michigan Wisconsin was pretty ugly too.
Well, that's what Wisconsin was last year. They kind of made the games ugly, and that's part of Chucky Hepburn's game, right? Is he makes the game ugly, and he disrupts you to a level that just makes you uncomfortable when you're playing. He's like the intramural guy. I don't know if you guys ever played intramural basketball, but he's like the intramural guy that goes out there, and his whole goal is just to make your team uncomfortable with his defense, and then produce from that. Obviously he's much better than some random intramural guy, but he's one of those guys. So, Derek, what if you had to give a first team yourself and maybe a few of these awards? How would you give them out?
Yeah, so I think Zach Edey is probably the no-brainer when it comes to Big Ten Player of the Year. I actually agree with what ended up coming out for the first team with Zach Edey and Jameer Young and Terrence Shannon and Tyson Walker and Boo Buie. And you know what? I think it's kind of cool to see. I'm not just saying this because you're on here, to see a team that typically comes in with low expectations have a player get some love on that. So I agree. There's always some uncertainty to me coming into a season, like especially with basketball. With only 5 guys on the court, one guy can make a huge difference. And with the number of transfers that are coming in and out of these teams every year, it's kind of hard to say on some of the projections for some of the transfers. A couple guys that I think are, worth mentioning though, is Nebraska. Tominaga, I think is his name.
Yeah, Kasai or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a baller, and it might get overshadowed by the fact that Nebraska's not a good basketball program. But I think he's worthy of first team conversation, because if you put him on a lot of the other rosters in the Big Ten, where he's got a little talent around him that's taken away some attention from his game, I think that he definitely goes off.
Yeah, for sure. I think that he's going to be a fun one to watch this year as well. Dylan, do you have any thoughts on what you would choose as your kind of first team in awards and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first team is pretty similar to what they've got, and then besides, switching Chucky Hepburn for Terrence Shannon, I think breakout player of the year. I mean, they had an interesting choice on there. Obviously, I talked about the Brooks Barnheiser hype. If I want to keep on the Wisconsin hype train, I could say Connor Esigian. He's someone who I know is really hyped coming out of high school. Struggled a little bit at times last year for Wisconsin, but he was a guy. I'm probably just hyping up Wisconsin too much because I actually saw them live twice compared to any other team besides Northwestern. But I guess I saw Penn State twice. I lost both of those. But I was a big Connor Esigian fan, even though he struggled at times. So I would say that. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I was going to make my own kind of first team, honestly, I love the Bruce Thornton pick. And as everybody knows, I'm an Ohio State fan, so call me biased, sure. But if I had to make my own first team, I'd probably put, obviously, Edie, Tyson Walker. I think Tyson Walker is going to be a dude this season as well. AJ Hogard as well. I really think Michigan State's going to have the best guard duo in the conference. And then I really like Boo Buie. And then, like I said, Bruce Thornton as well. Preseason player of the year, it has to be Zach Edey. I don't know what you're doing if you don't pick him to be that guy. And then my breakout player to watch, listen, we saw it with Keegan Murray. We saw it with Chris Murray. I really feel like the guy primed to really make that jump is Patrick McCaffrey at Iowa. I really feel like he has the length, he has the game to be able to do it. Whether he can put it all together this year or not, I think he's averaged around 10 points per game the past 2 years. So I'm not saying he's going to be a Keegan Murray or a Chris Murray and kind of score at the same pace, but I do think he could really break out and kind of be that main player that Iowa needs to really build and work around. And then, that kind of goes the same way with my wild card of Iowa. And then, how can I go wrong with the sleeper team, Ohio State? I'm an Ohio State fan. I'll go with it. So, all right, let's go into our last subject here, how conference realignment is impacting college basketball. So The Athletic put out an article where they interviewed several head coaches in college basketball. Two Big Ten coaches were quoted in this article, and basically they were just talking about how all other sports, including basketball, or all other sports, basketball included, other than football, should kind of just break off their own conference graphical location lines and stuff like that. They kind of saying, forget what football is doing, let them do their own thing, and let us stay here. And they kind of talked about just how many games they play. Football only has 12 games a year unless you get to the postseason. But they talked about, travel and those different kinds of things. But Chris Holtman in particular said this, I think about the moving and keeping the lines geographically the same in college basketball. He said, I think it makes sense. Whether it makes sense or not, I think that's where it's headed at some point. You could align sports that are playing twice a week, align them with more regional competition. And they quoted an anonymous Big Ten coach, so that way he could be a bit more candor. He said, football is only a 12-game season. We're playing 30 games. It's more feasible and more logistically sound to keep things a little bit more regional. So I ask you guys, all right, Dylan, let's start with you. Are the coaches right? Should college basketball and all other non-football sports revert back to some regionality and allow this to exist and allow football to exist on its own?
Yeah. So I personally kind of hate the whole conference realignment thing just because I think it's really unfair to these student athletes to kind of make them travel some of these distances, especially in the middle of the week. These are still students at the end of the day that have classes to go to and have school to deal with. And I personally think that, making them travel halfway across the country on a Wednesday night is pretty unfair to them. Football, you can make it work. They're playing on Saturdays. You could realistically fly out Friday night, be back on Sunday, and they're not really missing a ton of school. But if you're flying, 4 or 5 hour flights each way, that's 10 hours, you're going to end up missing a lot of time. Players are going to struggle. I mean, it's just a big deal. You also have to think about the physical toll it's going to take on some of these players. What's it got to be like sitting in a cramped airplane for these 5 hour plane rides, then playing a 2 hour game and then flying back? So personally, I would be a fan of, getting rid of these massive conferences for sports other than football. Basketball is the one where it's yes, they're chartering flights. I don't know if every team in the country, as I doubt they are, but the big schools probably are against. But still, I think it's really not super fair to them to make them travel all these far distances, just like in the middle of the week like that. So I would definitely be in favor of more of those localized schedules.
Yeah, I think it was Rick Pitino that said, of course, he's the coach at St. John's now, that, maybe it wasn't him, but I was reading the article, and one coach said, imagine, students having to get on just regular, like, commercial flights, and that flight gets delayed, and then they finally get there, and it's an hour before game time. The TV isn't going to schedule these things differently. So, Derek, where do you stand on all of this?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the conference realignment was clearly a financial decision that was really heavily driven by the big financial driver in college sports, which is college football. And to your point that you were making, Dylan, they play on Saturdays. They play on Saturdays. The teams that this is affecting, they charter their flights on Saturdays. The programs drive a lot of revenue. They can make it work with football, but the impact that has on the rest of the sports, a lot of football coaches have said it. A lot of football coaches have spoke out about conference realignment and the impact that it's going to have on all of the other athletic programs at their university, because Olympic sports aren't going to be able to do it. Right? You're not going to. I don't even know if Rutgers has a swim team, but is Rutgers swim team going to be flying to Los Angeles for a swim meet? Like, is that feasible? Is this stuff feasible to be asking these athletic departments to do? When you have programs that do play on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, is it feasible to not? Rutgers could go play a basketball game against USC or UCLA or Washington or Oregon, tip off at 8 p.m. their time. And if that's a weekday game, they're not tipping off till 11 p.m. in the time zone that they're normally playing in, right? And that's a big impact. And, at some point in time, college football continues to break away from the NCAA, at least the Power 5 conferences. They can kind of do what they want. They control more that goes on than what the NCAA does. I think that it would make sense eventually for college football to be treated as its own entity, and then to bring other conferences back. I would not care one bit if there was different teams in the conference for basketball season versus what's in their conference for football season. And I just think, it's at some point in time with football, I think the vision of the student athlete was lost. Right. NIL with these major programs has kind of stepped in, and they're almost minor league athletes at this point in time. And that's not true for the rest of the sports. That you might be able to point to some of the big time basketball programs and a couple of players and say you're kind of treated like a minor league NBA player while you're in college. But for the most part, the majority of the programs, these are still student athletes, and they're playing basketball, but they're trying to get a degree. They're going to college for something. They know that the likelihood of them ending up in the NBA is there's a very small percentage chance of them going to the NBA. And now they're being forced into these massive conferences.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question about, the Big Ten looking different in basketball versus football and all these other conferences, because I know that's something that, conferences obviously like, is the tradition of this team has been in our conference this many years, that kind of stuff. But to see, maybe Oregon and USC are in your conference in football, but then, maybe the Pac-12 or something revives itself for basketball. I think it would make sense for the student athletes, like you guys are saying, but at the same time, I'm like, how would I think through that? I'd almost want there to be in football some kind of like Big Ten, Pac-12 agreement to where they are, in their own conferences, but there's some kind of agreement between the two. Now, do I think the Pac-12 will ever come back? I don't know. There's a lot of news happening with Oregon State and Washington State. But it's interesting to think about. Dylan, do you have any thoughts about the Big Ten looking different in basketball than it does in football?
Yeah, I mean, I guess me personally, I'm a huge University of Miami fan, which I hate to say after Saturday. But so I've dealt with the ACC and dealing with this with Notre Dame my entire life. Um, I don't think it's the craziest thing to have schools, playing in one sport and not playing in another. I just think ultimately I see it as a realistic situation that's going to end up happening. You look at the ACC, I think one of the things that was happening with like Stanford was that Stanford has a ton more like Olympic sports than all the other schools in the ACC. So those other sports, they're going to stay separate from the ACC, and just because the ACC doesn't have those teams. So I think it's a situation where realistically you can have teams that are, just playing completely separate schedules in basketball compared to football. Do I think that happens soon? No, I think that'll take a couple of years if it were to be implemented, but I do think ultimately it should be the way that it goes.
Yeah, it's very interesting to talk about and to think about conference realignment, where it goes. And I know everybody's kind of tired of talking about it, but it's the reality of where we are and it's the reality of what's going on. So when news breaks about it, we need to be willing to talk about it and be willing to look into what is the possible future. So, all right, guys. Hey, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you breaking down your teams and sharing some thoughts on other things with the Big Ten. So reminder, if you liked what you heard here, you can hear it also from Victor's Nation over with there we go. With Derek, and then you can also hear it with Dylan over at the WildChat. We appreciate y'all being here. We are a podcast brought to you by Big Banter Sports, bigbantersports.com. Head on over there to find all of your Big Ten media needs. We will have another episode tomorrow with the Ohio Pod and Boiler Express to break down the Ohio State Purdue game and the rest of the games for the week. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Have a great day.